So in this first slide session, let's start by defining virtual reality and discussing some of its main characteristics. It's also important to note that there are many definitions of virtual reality which define kind of different boundaries for what constitutes virtual reality or not. So we will also talk a bit about that, about different definitions, different boundaries. So let's start by defining virtual reality. And one definition of virtual reality is by Laval in his online VR book that I have just mentioned. And you can find a complete reference and link for his book in the last slide. But the definition reads, virtual reality is inducing targeted behavior in an organism by using artificial sensory stimulation, while the organism has little or no awareness of the interference. So, this is one definition. I like this definition very much because it's a very broad definition. And in this definition, there are actually 4 characteristics or components. We can call these components of virtual reality. And these components are targeted behavior, we have an organism, we have artificial stimulation of senses, and we have awareness of the artificiality of the environment. Let's look at each one of these. So, targeted behavior means that the experience, the virtual reality experience, is somehow designed or engineered. So this means if it's something that is designed, it means that someone created the experience, and so they are somehow trying to target, trying to design also your behavior, or they are trying to design what you can do inside that environment. But so being a designed experience, it is not something that can occur naturally. It's not a naturally occurring phenomenon. It's designed, it's engineered. This does not mean that users inside that virtual reality experience will perform a completely scripted action. It doesn't mean this. So users can have, and we have, autonomous behavior. So having targeted behavior does not mean that users, participants, will only behave in a prescribed way. So obviously we have autonomy, but the environment is designed. That's what targeted behavior means. I'll take this opportunity to show you an example of a virtual reality system from science fiction. And then we can briefly discuss this. And I'll do this throughout these slide sessions. So I'll show you the video. Please let me know if you don't hear the sound. I think you will, but I'm not sure. So let me know if you don't hear correctly the sound.
Perhaps something in Saturn.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, but we're closing.
And you do understand we have a strict dress code, so if you boys don't leave right now,
I'm looking for Nicky the Nose.
The nose. Hasn't been here in months.
This is the wrong chapter. Computer, begin chapter 30. Try and look as if you're having a good time. No, look at me. Try to act naturally. There he is. Ruby, this is not a good time.
It's never the time for us, is it, Dix? Always some excuse, some case you're working on.
I have to talk to Nicky. I'll see you later.
Okay, but watch your caboose and dump the broad.
well, look what the cat dragged in. What's shaking, Dix?
The usual, Nick. Martinis and skirts. Excuse me.
Hey, I'm gonna take that personal in a second.
No offense.
Hey!
I think you got him. I don't get it. I thought you said this was all just a bunch of holograms. If it's holograms...
I disengaged the safety protocols. Without them, even a holographic bullet can kill.
What are you doing?
I'm looking for the neuroprocessor. Every Borg has one. It's like a memory chip. It will contain a record of all the instructions this Borg has been receiving from the collective.
All right. Jean-Luc, it's one of your uniforms.
Yes, this was Ensign Lynch.
Tough luck, huh?
I gotta get to the bridge.
Okay, so I think you were able to hear the sound okay. Thank you, yes. So in this example, this is an example, you probably recognize this, so this is from the Star Trek series, and that room that they were in is called the holodeck in the Starship Enterprise. And it's basically a virtual reality room. And clearly there is targeted behavior there. So you go inside the room, a specific room in the ship, in the Starship, you ask the computer to run a predefined simulation. So you ask it to run kind of a story. And even though the simulation then allows us to act normally and behave as we want, as you saw, so we can influence the course of action of the simulated characters. So we have autonomy and we can influence what happens around us. But there's also scripted behavior. So the characters in that story, they behave in a certain way every time. So this is a clear example of what this targeted behavior means. And we'll get back to this example later on. Another component that we have from that definition of virtual reality is an organism. What is this organism? Well, it's a human very often. most of the times. But it can be an animal also, and there are, and it's also kind of often applied. So it's in many situations, particularly in studies, in experiments about how animals perceive or how they behave. It's often the case that scientists use virtual reality and introduce an animal inside that virtual reality. But so generally, a virtual reality experience is created for a very specific type of organism. Because the experience must be designed specifically for a given way of perceiving reality. So we have an organism and we need to know how that organism perceives reality so that we can later on interfere in that organism's senses and kind of hijack the senses of that organism. So it's obvious that a human being has different senses from a fly or a mouse. So if we want to create a virtual reality experience for a fly, we need a completely different system, virtual reality system, than we would need for a human being. So in generally, we have an organism. Most often the organism is ourselves. It's a human being. But it's interesting to think about this. And it's actually interesting to think about, for example, would it make sense to speak of virtual reality for bacteria? Could a bacteria be the organism in a virtual reality experience? I don't have an answer to this. I'm just throwing out the question for you to think about. But it's this kind of questions that somehow test the limits of the definition of virtual reality that are interesting to for us to consider, even if we don't have final definitive answers. It's kind of interesting to think about this and to consider this. So obviously I don't have an answer to this, but you might have your own answers. And as I said, organisms can be animals. So virtual reality does not necessarily have to be experienced by a human being. Now, in this image, for example, you see an example of a virtual reality system. In this case, used for a cockroach. So for studying the behavior of cockroaches. But this is actually a virtual reality system, very similar to virtual reality systems that we can experience as humans. So in that case, there's a surround projection, video projection, and the cockroach is on top of a sphere that moves so that the cockroach can move, or she thinks she's moving, but it's actually always on the same place. But the ball underneath the sphere underneath moves it as she moves her legs. And the video projection is adjusted as the sphere underneath rolls, so that the cockroach thinks she's moving in the real world. But so animals can also be and often are organisms in virtual reality. But as I said, so most often the organism is a human being, and most of science fiction, most of the movies that feature virtual reality in most of those movies, the organism is in fact a human being. And we all know the various examples of depictions of virtual reality in a very negative way. For example, as in the Matrix movie. I'll show you this. I'm pretty sure that you all know this movie, but I'm going to show you a clip anyway.
Have you ever had a dream, Neo, that you were so sure was real? What if you were unable to wake from that dream? How would you know the difference between the dream world and the real world?
This can't
Be what? Be real?
It's going into replication.
Hey, Pop.
Still nothing.
Let's go. Let's go. Tank, we're going to need a signal soon.
We got a fibrillation.
APOC, location.
Targeting almost there.
It's going into arrest.
Lock, I got him.
Now, Tank, now.
Okay, so why is this example interesting? So in this case, the organism is a human, as often is, but in this case, it's an unwilling human, an unaware, actually, unaware human being. So he doesn't know. Most of the time, most of the human beings in that movie, they don't actually know they are experiencing a virtual reality. Another interesting thing is that the virtual reality system in that movie was not created by another human being, as is often the case. So we create virtual reality experiences for other human beings. In this movie, it was not. So it was created by a machine. And you see in that video clip that the human is instrumented with different connections throughout his body. And so the targeted behavior characteristic is also very clear in that movie, not exactly in this video clip, but in the movie. So the machine has designed a virtual world that closely simulates human reality. So it simulates physics, etc., etc. But so this is interesting because although the organism is a human being, as often is, in this case, it's a human being, but it's being manipulated by a machine. So, and that's a bit different from most virtual reality experiences that we, fortunately, that we experience in our world. Another component of that definition is the artificial sensory stimulation. So in a virtual reality experience, we need some kind of artificial stimulation of the senses of the organism. And in that last video clip of the Matrix movie, you saw that the input were fed directly into the user's brain. So the human had a number of connections throughout his body, but the main connection was something behind his head. So the input, the sensory stimulation was fed directly into the user's brain and kind of bypassing the physical stimulation of the human sense organs. So in that virtual reality environment, in order for the human to feel touch, his skin did not need to be pressed or touched, for example. The signals were fed directly into his brain. The machine were able to somehow do this. But this is nevertheless a way to artificially stimulate a human, the human sensory system directly into the brain, into the perception area of a given sense. In the holodeck in Star Trek, and so in the other clip that I showed you, the input, the sensory stimulation is actually delivered through the normal human senses. So a human being was inside that room and he would feel touch, smell, etc. As in a real environment. So in that case, the room was able to somehow project, to fabricate matter that could stimulate the human senses. So although in a different form, this is kind of the same as with our current commercial virtual reality headsets. So our eyes, our ears, and our sense organs in general are stimulated by the device. So we don't, fortunately, I think we don't have direct connections to our brain. But that could be an alternative to experience virtual reality. So in essence, what this component of the definition says is there's always some kind of artificial sensory stimulation in a virtual reality experience. Although maybe in some situations, the sense, one particular sense, is not completely hijacked. And this is often the case with commercial virtual reality headsets. So we put on a headset, but often we still get some lights from outside. So we still see shadows many times. So our vision sense is not completely hijacked by the computer. So something from the outside still bleeds in through the system. But there is at least a partial artificial stimulation. And this, the artificial stimulation is actually a very important aspect in virtual reality. Again, I'll show you another clip from a famous movie. This one is a bit more recent, Ready Player One, that shows the importance of this stimulation and different kinds of stimulation, artificial stimulation.
Old school.
You come prepared?
Prepared?
What kind of haptics you rocking?
Leather gloves and full visor or full body? Can you feel this?
Yeah. I got the X1 haptic boot suit with the microfiber crotch inlay.
Hi, Parzival. You did come prepared.
So, I've been thinking, maybe it'd be cool if we met up in the real world.
Now you'd be disappointed.
No, I wouldn't. I like you.
You don't even know me.
Okay, I'll stop this video clip here because the interesting part has already been shown. So it's an example. It's a cool example of, in this case, sensory stimulation. In this case, stimulation of the haptic sense. So in the movie, the character wears a full body suit that allows the system to stimulate his haptic sense, his sense of touch, and not just touch, but haptic in general. And obviously this enriches the virtual reality experience. And there are some commercial devices, not exactly like the one you saw in the movie, but there are commercial systems, full body suits that try to deliver that kind of thing. So virtual reality is not just about vision and sound. It's not just about hijacking a user's sense of vision or sense of hearing, but pretty much any sense. And the more senses you can hijack, the better, typically. So the richer the virtual reality experience will be. And another component is the awareness. Now, awareness, the word awareness needs to be interpreted carefully. So in most virtual reality systems, the idea is that the organism somehow seems unaware of the interference. So the organism is unaware that his senses are being hijacked. So a word of caution about awareness. I think we should understand this more as the sense of presence or naturalness of the virtual environment, more than awareness per se. Because what really matters is whether I feel I'm really present in a virtual environment, and not exactly if I'm completely unaware that I'm inside a virtual reality environment. So I may be aware that I'm inside something that is completely fabricated, but I can still have a sense of presence in that virtual environment world. So they are kind of related but slightly different concepts. The main thing is whether awareness leads to the sense of presence or a sense of mental immersion in that virtual environment, and whether the organism accepts that environment as natural. This is one example. I'll show you another example that's related to this awareness thing. This is from another movie.
Password enter. Welcome to VRT Online. Global net selected. What are you doing?
Making a long-distance phone call. Beijing Hotel.
Beijing selected. Access denied. Access granted. Hotel Beijing selected. General account selected.
Fax charges 32571, 15 January 2021, say 11:15 p.m. to 11:30 p.m.
He'll try to make a move. He'll use his connections on the net. Narrow the bandwidth. Go low rent.
Online translation?
Translator selected.
Shit. It's just an all-night coffee shop. They were sending the fax to a coffee shop here in Newark.
Local net selected.
Hold it. Hold it.
Command terminated.
Come on. All the way back to Newark. Yeah, it's here.
Fax buffer selected.
Part of it's here in the buffer of their fax modem. Nothing but a name. Dr. Alcom. Nothing came through. Shit.
Okay, so this is from a very old movie from '95 called Johnny Mnemonic, and in this example, it is clear that a person is aware of the sensory interference of the system. So he knows his senses are being hijacked by the virtual reality system. And he even talks to the woman outside the virtual reality environment. So clearly, some of the senses are only partially hijacked by the virtual reality system, because you can still hear her speak outside. So in this case, maybe awareness is not that important. So awareness is usually an important concept in virtual reality, but I would say in as much as it allows you to feel present in the virtual environment, regardless of whether you really know you are being, your senses are being hijacked by the virtual reality system or not. So to finish this slide session, let's just quickly see some alternative definitions of virtual reality. So we saw one by Laval, which is very broad, but not all definitions are as broad as the one from Laval. Some authors, for example, they don't include telepresence or teleoperation, which is something that we'll talk about later on, as being a virtual reality experience. Some definitions, for example, only include synthetic imagery as being virtual reality. If it's photographic, for example, some definitions don't consider that. This one from the other book that I mentioned by Sherman and Craig, this definition reads: virtual reality, a medium composed of interactive computer simulations that sense the participant's position and actions and replace or augment the feedback to one or more senses, giving the feeling of being mentally immersed or present in the simulation. So this kind of has the main components that we just saw. So we have an interactive computer simulation, so it's something that is designed. It's something that senses the participant position and actions, so it's able to react to your interactions. Gives you the feeling of being mentally immersed or present. So this is related to the awareness. But still, it's a slightly different definition, and the boundaries imposed by this definition might be slightly different from the boundaries imposed by the first definition that we saw. Another definition, it's from the same book. This is not a complete definition, but a quote still from Sherman and Craig says that virtual reality is a purely synthetic environment that the user interacts with. So in this definition, they are leaving out, for example, environments that are composed by photographs, by 360 photographs, for example, because that's not completely synthetic environments. So what I wanted to highlight with these definitions, and there are additional definitions, is that although they all point in the same direction, the boundaries of what one definition considers virtual reality may be different from the boundaries imposed by a different definition. So it's important to have this in mind, to know that there are different boundaries to what is considered virtual reality.